Here we are again, 5 o'clock in the morning, looking at a pair of vintage Pontiac cylinder heads. These are pretty cool, old school heads. Number 16 castings. And the date is F21-8. That would be June 21st, 1968. And this one is also June 1st, 68. Or June 21st. That's what that is. So June 21st, 68, these heads were made on the same day. What these are is vintage high performance Pontiac. These heads actually came on a 428 HO, like you'd find in a Gran Prix SJ, which I've heard claims of them coming on GTOs and Firebirds and shit, like 400 HO engines. Never seen one. These actually come off a 428. This is the second pair of these I've had in the last 40 years. And the other pair I had came off a 68 428. So, as far as I'm concerned, that's where you find them. But these heads, Pontiac, they started making their V8 engines like 55. About the same time small block Chevy come out. Matter of fact, the Pontiac fucking valve train design, the stud and pettit with the rocker arms and shit, was actually Pontiac's design, and Chevy got permission to copy it. So Pontiac is actually who come up with that shit. But the first engine was like a 287, I believe. And I ain't real big on them early Pontiacs. I think they had a 370, yeah, 389. Then they went to a 421. Then you could get a 400 come out in 67. And then the 428 come out in 68. And the 455 come out in 70. They had a 326 they made, and a 350 that was also, I think the 326 come out in 63, went to 67. The 350 Pontiac come out about 67. I think it went to about 75, 76 or so, mid 70s. But not too many people focused on them. Everybody fucked with the 400s, the 428s, the 455s, which actually the 428s were rare. I only had one. I've had a shitload of Pontiac engines. They were my thing. First engine I ever built was a Pontiac engine. So I've always had a soft spot for them. But about the best ones would have been your 400 Ram Air, your Ram Air 3s, your Ram Air 4s, and then they had over-the-counter Ram Air 5 heads and cam, and pretty much a whole fucking engine, and but it wasn't released in a production vehicle. But if they would have, it would have changed everything, because would nobody been able to fuck with it. Ram Air 5 400s, they were 525, 530 horse stock. So they were pretty healthy. They were factory racing engines, more or less. But they did sell some of the heads and complete engines and shit. I seen one in a GTO. Looked like it came there, but it was actually a over-the-counter. Somebody bought it and put it in there and made a what if. But the old Ram Air 4s and shit, Pontiacs were generally underrated. And you see, they used to have these muscle car shootouts, like pure stock. You know, they had to have every fucking thing pretty much as it came from the factory. And a bunch of people would show up with their pure stock muscle cars, and they run on bias ply, little skinny ass tires and shit, that OEM type tires, wide ovals and shit. But that's back in the 80s. 68 Firebird, an old boy named Jim Mino showed up. They had this shit like once a year at Memphis. Old Jim Mino, he showed up. He won the whole fucking thing like 4 or 5 years in a row. And then he quit going to give somebody else a chance. But it was the fastest stock muscle car there, and it was a Ram Air 2 400 Firebird. But that fucking thing ran like 1190s at 122 or better. So old boy had it dialed in real good. But he was an NHRA stock eliminator drag racer normally. That 68 Firebird was just one of his projects for events like that. But it smoked everything. Hemi Cudas, 454 LS6 Chevelles, Stage 1 Buick 455s. You name it, that old Firebird smoked its ass. And I was amazed. I had a 67 Firebird back in the day, but it was that Jim Mino's 68 Firebird that got me interested in them. That thing was a bad son of a bitch, and he got tore down every year, and he checked out totally legal. About the only thing, which the first year the rules were tight as dicks have been, but as time went on, they started allowing better tires and shit, and that was about it. You could run a stickier tire. And that's when he was running 1190s, hell, but I think he was running 1220s on wide ovals, so. But for that car to be running that number, and it was factory rated at like 345 horse, that fucker had to have been making way more than 345 horse. He's beating 450 horse LS6 Chevelles and shit, 4¼ horse 426 Hemis, and he got a 345 horse 400. But Pontiac, what they do, one of their tricks, they rate their horsepower at a lower RPM than what the engine would actually pull. They rated at like 4,800 RPM, but the engine might pull up 5,800, and it's going to make more power there. These fucking things, you can sink some money in this old Pontiac shit these days. These fuckers, I just acquired these as some cores, but by the time I'm going to put 200 long Ferrea valves in them and shit and set them up for a big roller cam, but by the time I'm done with them, it would have been cheaper to just buy a set of fucking Edelbrocks or something. But that ain't the look I'm going for with this particular build. I'm building an engine. I got a 63 Super Duty 421 Catalina that's been blown up since 1970. And I've been dragging this fucking body around for decades. And I've always said one of these days I'm gonna get that fucking thing running. So I figured now I ain't gonna live forever, so I better get my ass on it. So I've been rounding up some shit to build me an engine to put in that fucking thing. But I didn't want it to look like I just bought an engine from Rodney Butler. And, Rodney Butler's a killer. One of the best Pontiac engine builders in the world, but a lot of them engines look about the same. You get your standard issue Edelbrock heads and, same fucking valve covers and shit. But I'm going to build this one as it would have been in the 70s. So they didn't make Edelbrock heads in the 70s, but they did make these fucking number 16s. Back in the day, I built a 455 Pontiac with a pair of these 16s that were ported and had a shitload of work done to them. And I ran mid-10s with a pair of these fucking heads. So I already know they got potential. The Pontiac heads, they come in a wide variety. A lot of them would look similar. If you're not familiar with Pontiac shit, you just look at a pile of Pontiac heads. You're not really going to see much difference in shit other than the devil's in the details. One way you know you got a good pair of heads, the factory ones come with screw-in studs and guide plates, where the bullshit heads came with press-in. So there's one clue. Another clue is the good ones come with the big fucking, these are 211 177 valves, where your bullshit came with like a 196 and a 166 valve. So these came with bigger valves. And then they came with smaller chambers. That's a 72cc chamber. Like your typical 70s 6X head, they had them for 400s and 455s, and they'd be like 98cc, 110cc. Some Pontiac heads are like 120cc. You try to use a pair of them fucking turds, you're gonna have about 7-to-1 compression on a 400. But these heads here were factory rated at like 10.75-to-1 compression, but my shit it ain't factory. And them 72cc chambers would be more like 68. And then zero deck block. And I'm going to use a 38 thick head gasket, Icon piston with a 4.5cc valve relief. Be looking at 11.5 to 1, a little more actually, but call it 11.5, 11.6. Somebody port match these to like a fucking Ram Air 3 exhaust gasket or something. It was probably done back in the 70s. Ain't no telling. These heads were heads of choice for hot rodders, fucking with Pontiacs back in the day. So they've been bowl blended and shit. Before I bought them, I saw pictures of them disassembled, and they had a nice valve job and bowl blend and shit. And somebody put some work into them back in the day. They came off a hot rod. I'm gonna use a big fucking roller cam. Super Victor intake. Bleed off some of that compression with that cam, which I'll probably end up running it on E85 or something. Because these fuckers will detonate, these cast iron Pontiac heads and high compression. The fuckers are known to detonate. These old high performance Pontiac heads are worth a fucking fortune now. See, they've been ported along the lines in their life. And they have double valve springs in there, so it had a cam in it, obviously. Still got these fucking oil shredders and shit, and all that shit's gotta go. Which I'm gonna installed height on Pontiacs compared to like a Chevy. It's like 1.6. You might get 1.7, but it ain't much. And with the cam I'm going with, the valve springs and shit, I'm gonna need about a 1.95. So I'm gonna go with a 200 long valve or 0.250 long valve on intake and exhaust. New Ferreras. Take them to the machine shop, get a nice 5-angle valve job and shit. I might dust off the old grinder and touch up these ports a little bit. I can port heads, I just don't like to put my work out there for fuckers to scrutinize. But I've been grinding on fucking heads since the 80s, so I know a little bit about it. Back in the day, but you wanted a high flowing pair of cylinder heads, you better learn how to grind on them fuckers, because that was about your only choice unless you were a millionaire. So head porting is a lost art, but I just do it for myself, and I said, I ain't trying to show everybody how it's fucking done. There's plenty of videos out there doing that. These old heads probably made some pretty good power. Pontiacs, they're different than Chevys. You can't really compare them apples to apples. Like runner volumes and shit. And Pontiacs from the port exit to the fucking valve seat are like over an inch longer port, and the exhaust port's like fucking 3 inches longer. So the CCs on the exhaust port is bigger than a fucking intake port on a Vortec head. So they're totally different. They're not Chevys. It's been a while since I built a good Pontiac engine. I'm going to try to keep it all old school on the outside. I'm going to use a set of gold Moroso valve covers. Use that big fucking Super Victor, which they didn't have Super Victors back in the day either. But they did have Nash Warriors. And they look kind of like a Super Victor. That's what I ran back in the day. Had a Nash Warrior. That's the name of that fucking place I bought it from. Can't remember now, but they sold Pontiac racing parts and shit. Midwest Motorsports or something like that. Romulus, Michigan. I wish I still had that old Warrior intake. Them fucking things are rare now. But somebody definitely done some grinding on these fuckers. And they are bowl ported, slightly cleaned up. That's a long port in that motherfucker. So I'm gonna use these old number 16 heads. Build me a 400. I'm gonna buy an aftermarket 4-inch stroke crankshaft. Build me a 433. Similar to a 421. I'm going to do it like it was done back in the day. But it's going to have some modern valve train. I'll probably go with stud girdles and all nice shit. Rocker arms. Probably Harlan Sharp rocker arms. Always had good luck with them. Ferrea valves. I think I can get the intakes and exhaust for like $250. So it's not pennies, but it ain't gonna break a motherfucker either. And the springs, they're kind of pricey. Retainers and shit. Go with 10-degree locks. I got a pair of Hooker Super Competition headers there. That'll go with them heads nicely. Put them on the old Catalina. They're in pretty good shape. They're 1 3/4 Hooker Super Comp. I'm slowly gathering up some shit I still have some Pontiac engines tucked away. They're not here, they're other garage. But I have a few 455 and several 400s and 389. But I've decided I got a 67 400 come out of a Firebird. I'm going to use it with these heads with a 4-inch stroke crank, port 30 over. I think it comes out to about 433 cubes. Now let's see. 27. Yeah, about 433. Stick that in the old Catalina. Pontiacs were my first love. There's the old Catalina there. Photo. I was a founding member of the fucking Hot Rod Power Tour. I went on the first fucking one. I got that license plate. I was in the first bunch, the first year. I think it was in the late 90s. I took a Malibu station wagon. Pretty fucking rowdy. But I was in the first couple of hundred people to ever do the Hot Rod Power Tour. It was called the Hot Rod Power Club back then. They still do it every year. I ain't done it in probably 15 years now. I used to go do that